The OTAG mission is to get a better understanding of the phenomenon of ground-level ozone or smog in the 37 easternmost states in the country, and most particularly to understand the issue of transport, how one state's emissions are impacting another state, and then to come up with reasonable, cost-effective solutions. But there's no doubt about it, it's a tough problem. It has huge economic and political ramifications. We need to factor those considerations into our deliberations so that although this is based on sound science, it has many policy implications. The OTAG process is an unprecedented process. It's an extraordinary collaboration of over 700 stakeholders, and so we've had not only 37 states participating in this process, we've had representatives from impacted industries, from the utility to the coal to the railroad association to the petroleum industry and the auto industry, as well as interested environmental groups, both national groups and regional groups that care about this issue. OTAG has two significant contributions to environmental quality in this country. One, we've developed a very sound scientific and technical database to understand this phenomenon and to come up with solutions. And secondly, we've come up with a collaborative process that I think will be a role model into the future. I think that what you've found is that if you give people a forum and an opportunity to express their viewpoints, to share their expertise, to be heard and to have influence on a process, they begin to believe in that process, they want the process to work, and they begin to care about the outcome. And that's why OTAG has been so successful to date. If the OTAG process is successful, American citizens across the 37 OTAG states will be breathing cleaner air.
I think the mission of OTAG is laid out in our very early meetings, is to look how the states can develop strategies to help reduce ozone and its precursors, such that in combination with local controls, national air quality standards can be attained. So the bottom line is, how can the states work together to help achieve air quality standards in the critical areas of New York, Northeast Coast, Chicago, and in Atlanta. I think there's a lot of positive attributes to OTAG. First, everybody was invited to attend, and I think virtually all the states are taking an active role in various levels because of perhaps the impact on the states or the resources availability. But it was open to so many different people, regulatory agencies as well as businesses. It's a public process. We've had hundreds of people in the room, most of which never speak, that have come to listen and to learn and to understand the process. We've really moved the science forward. We've moved the public information forward, and it's made a difference.
This process has brought state commissioners closer together, both OTAG and ECOS, and you can much more easily pick up a phone, talk to another commissioner or secretary about a regional problem, and it's just a spin-off benefit from this. It's very dramatic. What we're doing in OTAG is very beneficial to business and individuals in New Jersey because we get to reach attainment which is protective of the public health. I mean, we're creating a better air environment for the health of New Jersey citizens. So it's been a very inclusive process. It's been open, and I don't think there's ever been a problem addressed in such a broad-based fashion as this one has from a stakeholder's perspective.
EPA was trying to find some way to gather information from a large group of stakeholders about the problems, perceived or potential or real, that existed from ozone transport. And so they began to work with the state of Illinois and then with ECOS in a new way of gathering information from a broad range of stakeholders to make recommendations to EPA about what rules they should establish in that area. The extent of the participation has been greater in this activity, I think, than in any other EPA rule-making or policy-making activity with which I've been familiar. 650 or so interested parties on the mailing list. If you come late to the meeting, you can't get in the meeting room. 37 or more states actively involved in these meetings. That is the broadest range of participation of any activity that I'm familiar with that EPA has done. And that's all to the good, because more ideas are presented, more ideas are considered, and that strengthens the final recommendations.
EPA's expectation was not that OTAG would come up with an answer for everybody's non-attainment area, but it was our expectation that they would come up with an answer to address the transport issue in the eastern United States and to come up with a strategy for how to solve that so that the boundary conditions at the serious and above non-attainment areas throughout the eastern United States would be sufficiently low so that those areas then could get their additional controls within their area and meet the standard. I think it's a model in the fact that you've got a group of people with a common goal working together. You've got the people at various levels involved, but certainly at the policy level, you've got people who can make the decisions, and once the decisions are made, carry them through. So I think they have the ability to follow through on their actions at the policy level. I also think there's a lot of benefit in the way it's been structured with the subgroups and work groups supporting the policy committee, because we've had a lot of the technical expertise from the states and other organizations at work together with industry and environmental groups as well.
Well, the value for my state, which is Delaware, is that we cannot achieve ozone attainment by ourselves. We simply cannot do it. By the same token, we can't do it solely through the actions of others. And the benefit of my participation is making it clear to folks that there's a need for us to deal with the transport of ozone into our area, but also imparting an understanding that we've got work of our own to do. And I think that establishes a certain credibility and trust for us interacting with the other states and also back home. So I would say the challenge for the future is identifying what those homegrown solutions are, and if OTAG itself doesn't offer enough assistance from other people, is for us to figure out how to apply the appropriate amount of cajoling and pressure to get that to happen as well.
There is a very serious ozone problem in a number of eastern cities that it's very clear cannot be solved by simple traditional reduction strategies in those immediate areas. And there is some kind of a transport phenomenon occurring, blowing precursors and ozone across some distances that contribute to those problem areas. We think that the work that's been done pretty well shows that the emissions that come from our states are probably not significant contributors to the problems in these non-attainment areas, and we think that most people that are participating agree with that. And I think the result will be that hopefully there won't be any large emission reductions targeted for our part of the country, although I think we all feel a commitment to try to be good neighbors, and if indeed it does for some reason turn out that there is a significant contribution from our states, or that in the future there may be, because of growth, a significant contribution, we certainly want to participate in good air quality management and be good neighbors.
We have done a tremendous amount of work to improve the science of predicting ozone through computer modeling. We have the best inventory of the pollutants that create ozone that has ever been put together. We have taken the science to a level that is better than anything that has been done in this country before. So we know a lot about how ozone is formed, how it is transported from place to place, and what kinds of things will impact that. We believe that by participating in this process and making a sincere effort in that regard, which I think we have, that we would come a lot closer to coming up with a solution for Atlanta than we would if we had just sat by and tried to deal with the issue ourselves.
what we're concerned about is making sure that the transport component of the regional smog problem is addressed so that the Northeast has a fighting chance to institute measures, fulfill the commitments that are already been made to achieve the ozone standard, clean air, good public health benefits across the region.
Connecticut, of course, is in that region that sees the highest of the ozone levels in the east and in the northeast. And therefore, we're very interested in making sure that ozone attainment is reached in a reasonable time period, that our customers' health is protected. We found over the 25 years of trying to reach that, of course, that we can't do it by ourselves. We've taken extraordinary steps and we've come a long way in the Northeast, in Connecticut in particular. But there is just still overwhelming effects of transport of ozone and precursors coming in from upwind areas that are going to need to be resolved.
The Midwest Ozone Group is convinced the Clean Air Act is working. It's convinced that we're seeing improvements in air quality all across the country. It has been no more apparent than it is in the Midwest that we're seeing those improvements, with many parts of the Midwest having gone from non-attainment to attainment. Our concern is there are other areas of the country which haven't achieved attainment, and we're concerned that those areas of the country would turn to the Midwest to reduce emissions further, and to do so at a time when we believe the data doesn't support that conclusion.
Southeast needs to deal with the Southeast problem. The Midwest needs to deal with the Midwest problem. And the same thing in the Northeast. It's not a long-range transport issue. It's a relative short transport issue where states that have problems and their adjacent states next to them need to get together and deal with the problem.
TVA serves people in 8 million people in parts of 7 southeastern states. There's also potential for significant economic impacts in our region. TVA is one of the 2 or 3 top consumers of coal in the entire nation. OTAG is focusing a lot of resources on reducing emissions from coal-fired power plants. So anything that's done to reduce coal-fired power plant emissions will have a significant impact on energy costs in my region.
The mine workers are concerned primarily about the loss of their jobs. The coal mining industry in the eastern U.S. is concentrated in the poor Appalachian states, running from Alabama up through Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia. The average coal miner in this country earns about $40,000 a year in wages and benefits. Coal miners are the mainstays, the economic pillars of the small communities in which they live. And when coal miners lose their jobs, as they did in the case of acid rain legislation, communities throughout Appalachia suffer.
In the reformulated gasoline program, we had some states opt in. The last minute they opted out. Well, those states that opted out undermined the OTAG process because they reduced the credibility of the regulators, because they asked industry to do something and they reneged. My philosophy is that go out there, sell the product again, rather than say I don't want to play anymore.
The oil industry has gone through a whole series of controls under the Clean Air Act for the last many years. And as a result of that, we've seen a lot of improvement in air quality. You know, frequently you hear how the air quality is getting better, and it's due to several things. One of the factors is the changes in gasoline and diesel fuel that have made tremendous improvements in air quality. And we're on track to even do more under the Clean Air Act.
We've accomplished a great deal since the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments and before then in cleaning up the ozone in the air. The future improvements will come at a cost, and we don't know how extensive the cost will be. The more extensive the control strategy, the deeper the economic impact.
we have to maintain the energy structure. We have to maintain our energy base in order to have any products or services. Without those products or services, we can't do anything. And we need, at the same time, to generate the best and cleanest environment that we can. And everybody wants that end goal. And I think it's possible to get there.
One lesson is when we focus on pollution decrease strategies, we have to look at all the benefits from getting those pollution decreases. We should look at the reduction in ozone levels in our urban areas, but we also have to look at the benefits to human health caused by reducing particulate levels, by improving visibility, reducing damage to crops, and reducing damage to fisheries in the estuaries along the eastern seaboard of the United States. All of these problems are associated with the same pollutants we'll be going after in order to solve the urban ozone problem. I think that it's important that citizens organizations be invited into these processes as welcome participants. It's too easy, I think, sometimes for government agencies to wind up talking to themselves and forget that their business at the end, their business is to protect the public.
It's not very often that policymakers or politicians put their money where their mouth is. And OTAG, whether it was intended or not, really was an almost instantaneous putting their money where their mouth is event. Because here you had the Federal Clean Air Act implemented by the federal EPA facing an unusual problem involving pollution that crossed state lines. I think what people have to understand is that what makes environmental policy work tricky is that very often you're combining a sense of real urgency, in this case making the air of major cities breathable for their citizens, with very complex scientific, technical, and economic issues. It really does take a lot of patience to work those issues through before you can figure out what the right answer is. OTAG, by and large, has invested those resources and invested that patience.
State legislators across the country have expressed concern that state-appointed officials will reach agreements without adequate consultation with state legislators, and several groups of state legislators have discussed resolutions making it clear that they would prefer that no agreements be reached or have any force of law until they have been ratified by the relevant state legislators. As a result, we now know far more about what different changes in our pollutant emissions are likely to have what effects at various places downwind. This should enable us to do a better job of crafting our policies to improve the likelihood that we will get maximum environmental bang for every environmental buck.
Our group's stake as a company is that we are a large NOx emitter in our own province. Our province, much like upwind states, receives a significant share of imported emissions from across borders. And we also export emissions downwind into other jurisdictions. So the type of problem we have and how we need to solve it mirrors what OTAG is doing. And with OTAG, each state is like a domino. Like Georgia emits, it falls into the next state. That state emits, it falls into the next state, and so on and so on. So we receive emissions from Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, and we export into New York State, into the province of Quebec. So if we shut down all of our power stations, we turned off all our cars in our province, we would still exceed our own targets for ground level ozone. So to solve our own problem, we have to interact with the neighboring jurisdictions.
I don't think there have been a process anywhere in either of our countries where there's been such an enormous effort put in financially, but even more important, by senior people at all the states with EPA, from industry, into trying to make this process as substantive and as valuable as possible. I think that in itself says a lot for the way we do business. It also, because of the welcome that we've been given throughout the whole process, it also says a lot for the relationship that our two countries have. And you know, we've managed to solve a lot of things in the past. And I guess because I'm an optimist, we'll probably find a way to muddle through and solve a lot of things in the future.
In the Midwest, you have a stagnant condition by and large, although you have some persistent longer wind vectors along the eastern boundary.
We've got wind. Wind is what causes our... Make it clear earlier about needing to massage a few donkeys along with the elements. And if you think about the approach that I think too many of us have used in terms of looking at these slides.
That specific information, yeah.
Just to add, the low ozone day vectors here. A bit more to me on this lower right-hand map over here. The transport vectors on high ozone days.
Ozone formed from reaching the upper layer at night. On our star northeast in 1995, when I...
This is real information. It's historic data that has lots of integrity in it.
Okay, capture it. One way to try to capture wind volume, one way to try to make that connection.
To kick it in the anyway, what it does is it takes 20, 25 years of real hard OTR deep south. And it appears there is chronically for us in New England
would be observed. It seems to suggest that everything is not an ozone problem here, transport problem here. The other point is destination is not going to happen in nature because the mixing height, the layer 5, we're talking about the loft layer, it goes up in the place as well as it's dissipating. If we see that
Yeah, we don't even know you're there. Something service. They got so many pretty little things in there.
And what's your title?
I'm a Senior Advisor, Environmental Affairs for Ontario Hydro. It's the electric utility for the province of Ontario.
Okay. What is your group's stake in the OTAG process?
Our group's stake as a company is that we are a large NOx emitter in our own province. Our province, much like upwind states, receives a significant share of imported emissions from across borders, and we also export emissions downwind into other jurisdictions. So the type of problem we have and how we need to solve it mirrors what OTAG is doing. And with OTAG, each state is like a domino. Like Georgia emits, it falls into the next state. That state emits, it falls into the next state, and so on and so on. So we receive emissions from Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, and then we export into New York State, into the province of Quebec. So if we shut down all of our power stations, we turned off all our cars in our province, we would still exceed our own targets for ground level ozone. So to solve our own problem, we have to interact with the neighboring jurisdictions.
What is your opinion? What is your, speaking as a Canadian, what's your view of the OTAG process?
I think it's, well, it's large and cumbersome because of its size, but it's the first clear evidence I've seen of states working cooperatively to deal with transport between states. And I really want to commend the participants for the quality of work that's being done and the dedication of what's being done. I think it's a good model of a process. We ourselves have some multi-stakeholder working groups within Ontario. It's a smaller scale, but it mirrors somewhat this process here. I think it's a good model.
What do you think would improve the model for future efforts similar to OTAG?
I think a willingness to experiment in the process as opposed to design the perfect system on paper first. I think that would be beneficial. We ourselves are trying to link with adjacent U.S. states in terms of developing emission trading systems where we have a common commodity. Our systems may be completely different in how they're built, but how the commodity is created and transacted is identical. So we did a pilot trade last year with the state of Michigan between Ontario Hydro and Detroit Edison, and it simply showed us how easy it was to do that. And some of the things we thought were going to be obstacles, by doing the real trade, we found were not obstacles. And I think a more experimental approach would be helpful to OTAG.
I can't believe I almost didn't interview you. What about, are there lessons to be drawn from the OTAG process? And again, if you don't feel that's the case, you don't have to answer.
I think sometimes the issue of transport is taken too far. Like quite clearly, Georgia's emissions do not impact Ontario. Quite clearly, Georgia's emissions do not impact New York State. However, it's between adjacent states, you know, where emissions from here fall in here, cause harm, and they also make it more difficult when those emissions come. There's already some background, and so on and so on. I think sometimes OTAG has got distracted with from one end of the region to the other, when really, I guess, you know, that analogy I used before of the dominoes is the appropriate model of transport.
Is there going to be an impact of OTAG on people in Ontario?
Yes. Basically, if OTAG fails to deliver improved air quality from the transport issue, Ontario is a recipient of harm from U.S. emissions. And if we are unable to link with OTAG in a real tangible way, downwind U.S. states will be impacted from our emissions too. So I think it's quite critical for Ontario that OTAG succeed and deliver real results.
Excellent. Your candid opinion of the science that you've seen as part of the OTAG process?
I think it's first rate. I think it's as good as it gets. That said, one problem I see in the science is a focus on modeling past peak episodes. And the problem, as the EPA's proposed new air standards kind of point out, the problem is of course peak episodes, but it's also a large background that hangs around. And I think more modeling emphasis on that background and how it translates would be instructive to the process. Also, there is an incredible amount of monitoring data, and the monitoring group, to my understanding, perhaps does not have as prominent a place as the modelers in the effort. And the monitoring data is real data. The modeling tries to project.
You were very articulate in describing your relationship with the group in Detroit. I want to make sure that...
Mine too.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about the experience that you've personally had in trading and incentives.
I first got involved in trading through a number of studies that were being done in Ontario, one of which was funded by Ontario Hydro, some of various government agencies. And I joined US discussions in September '93 in Detroit, which was the first meeting of the Midwest Task Force on Emission Trading. And its mandate was to try to establish means and mechanisms for Midwest states to trade emission reductions between states. And I saw this as an opportunity to learn something about how to cross borders, given that each state will do its own thing and have its own legislative process. How can you build common elements to cross borders? And from there was a series of meetings throughout the Midwest and Wisconsin and Chicago, and that led to a Council Great Lakes Governors meeting. And at the Council Great Lakes Governors meeting, which was in May of '94, again, things tended to bog down in the theoretical, and it was suggested at that meeting that perhaps 4 interstate trades, pilot trades, would be instructive to that process. And the one we carried out was one of those. We're still waiting for the other 3 to happen. Would be nice. And you know, that process to me was very educational, and it formed the basis for what we've developed and modified for Ontario's program. You know, we have different legislative processes, and but the bones of what was discussed there, what's being developed in the trading incentives work group here, are being folded into what we develop in Ontario.
For the general public who may not quite understand what trading is all about, can you give a very primary lesson in what trading is and what its value is to the consumer or to the person who lives in a region?
Okay, well, trading, we're talking trading of emission reductions. So in an airshed, if you imagine an airshed as being a bubble, a number of sources emit into that airshed. You can have electric utilities that burn coal and oil. You can have motor vehicles, lawnmowers where people cut their grass, everything. It goes into the air. And it cooks in the summer, and those emissions produce ground level ozone, which has harm. Now, the principle of emission trading basically says that if you have a number of sources emitting, their costs for reducing those emissions are going to be different. In some cases, very different. What trading allows you to do is those sources that can do better than they have to do, you know, if they can go beyond that, they can in fact recover costs by selling how much better they do to someone who's going to have real financial difficulty. The benefits are twofold. One, the airshed sees the same emission reduction as if each source was mandated. There also is built in an incentive for those who can over-improve, which the regulatory system doesn't allow for. It just gets you to the line, and anyone who over-improves, if they're noticed at all, there's no tangible reward. Also, in that you have in each jurisdiction a number of older companies that emit, and their lifetimes are limited anyway. The availability of trading allows them to continue operating as companies, keeping those jobs alive. And then in the normal economic cycle, they'll shut down. But your environmental problem doesn't have to necessarily cost jobs, solving your environmental problem. So there are some economic and environmental benefits that are tightly woven together. I don't know if that was...
Oh, that was wonderful.
Too far, too deep.
You've been a wonderful interview. I really appreciate it. Tell me your name and the title as you'd like to see it appear.
My name is Steve Hart. I'm Director of the Transboundary Air Issues Branch with Environment Canada, the Government of Canada.
What is your group's stake in the OTAG process?
Our stake is really quite enormous in that we look forward to some very positive action being taken as a result of the OTAG process, because as far as our country is concerned, we approximately, depending on what part of the country, and anywhere from almost 100% to 50% of the problem comes from episodes originating in the U.S. If you take the city of Windsor, for example, it's close to 100%. If you take the city of Toronto, it's approximately 50%. Therefore, our interest is very critical. We are also interested in seeing what the specific actions, whether the legislative or regulatory actions are taken, which can result in some overall effects. I might say that we're fully well cognizant of the fact that we have some work to do at home as well, and we will be taking our national smog plan to our ministers in September of this year for final approval. So we believe that actions are being taken on both sides of the border, which are very important to get this problem solved.
Have you been active as observers or as participants?
We've been active as observers in the process because although we have been given chances to intercede when it was considered necessary, but effectively not being from the U.S., we have been observers. But I might add, and this is a very positive comment, very welcome observers, being encouraged to participate in whatever way we saw fit. So I might say that we'll welcome this opportunity throughout the process.
Would you care to speculate on what the outcome of the process might mean to the individuals in your province?
Well, I'm not, speaking as a member of the federal government. I'm really speaking on behalf of the government of Canada, not the province of Ontario, any province.
I'm sorry.
I think it's crucial because if...
I'm sorry, excuse me, sir.
It's crucial, yes. Okay.
All right,
if the OTAG process is a process that results in nothing, then that has an enormous negative impact on what we're doing. I think the process itself has been very, and we'll probably get into that later on, has been probably one of the best I've seen. But however, the success or failure of the process is going to be what results are taken at the end. If there are no actions, then it has an enormous negative impact. If, however, actions are taken, which help to resolve your problems in the U.S., which I believe are critical, it has a spin-over effect, which is very important to our ability to solve our problems, which are created 50% from rails.
Are there any positive outcomes absent policy decisions? That is, let's say that there are no conclusions or recommendations issued. Is there anything that the process has yielded that's of value to you?
I think one cannot help but admit that no matter what the result of the process, the enormous amount of data through the various scenario runs that we now have, which we didn't have before, cannot help but be useful in the future. we just hope to repeat once again that this enormous amount of very useful information is put to some practical use.
Have there been any pilot projects run that might forecast future U.S.-Canadian cooperation?
If I understand the question rightly, the scenario runs that have been run have stopped at the U.S.-Canada border. However, we've been told that we would have access to the computer runs and the programs, and we are actually in the process of trying to generate some of those runs which would actually show where the flow or the impact into our country is. And I guess that underlies the openness of the process of the OTAG. It has been, I think there's been an enormous attempt made to keep the process open, to keep it available to everybody, to let the various stakeholders even influence the types of the various scenario runs that were made. So from that point of view, again, it's been a very useful process.
Are there any other aspects of this process that you care to comment on from your point of view before I wrap up this interview?
Sure. Let me go back to what I believe is probably an excellent example of the kind of democratic process that runs in both our countries, and this is not a political but a political statement. I don't think there have been a process anywhere in either of our countries where there's been such an enormous effort put in financially, but even more important by senior people at all the states, with EPA, from industry, into trying to make this process as substantive and as valuable as possible. I think that in itself says a lot for the way we do business. It also, because of the welcome that we've been given throughout the whole process, it also says a lot for the relationship that our two countries have. And you know, we've managed to solve a lot of things in the past. And I guess because I'm an optimist, we'll probably find a way to muddle through and solve a lot of things in the future.
Thank you very much. Okay. The first thing is going to be an easy one. Sally, would you tell us how you'd like to be identified, how you want your name and title?
Oh, okay. I'm Sally.